I just keep thinking back to like Brent Mayer, who was on here doing one of our podcasts and said, stay alive till 2025. So, we're here, right?
Welcome to BuzzHouse, a Baker Tilly podcast where you can hear all the buzz around multifamily housing with all the info you need to help you win now and anticipate tomorrow. Hi, I'm Don Bernards, the principal in charge of Baker Tilly's multifamily housing practice.
And I'm Garrick Gibson, a principal at Baker Tilly, also specializing in consulting on multifamily housing transactions across the country.
Let's get started. For today's episode, Garrick and I are going to review some of the highlights from this year's BuzzHouse episodes, along with discussing what we are looking forward to seeing in the year ahead. A lot of new things on the horizon. Before Garrick and I jump into our discussion, I'm going to give a few highlights from around the industry. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, published in the Federal Register operating cost adjustment factors for eligible affordable rental multifamily properties with an anniversary date on or after February 11th, 2025. The national OCAF this year will be 4.8%, and state ranges from 3% in Connecticut to a high of 7% in Louisiana. This compares to a nationwide overall rate of 5.3% in 2024, so a small drop, but still probably higher than the overall average over time. In other news, Congress began work on legislation to provide federal relief to states that have experienced major disasters over the past few years. Recently, President Biden sent House Speaker Johnson the administration's $99 billion request for funding through several federal agencies to help areas impacted by hurricanes Helene and Milton, and, quote, every other disaster since Congress last passed a comprehensive disaster package in 2022. This would include dollars from FEMA, CDBG, a disaster recovery program, and additional lending capacity from the Small Business Administration. NCSHA estimates that states that have suffered from recent disasters could receive as much as $4.5 billion in supplemental housing credit authority if Congress used similar methodology for determining additional amount as it has in the past. So definitely want to keep our eyes on the disaster relief packages that are being worked on currently out in Washington, D.C. In additional news, the federal 9% low-income housing tax credit per capita multiplier will increase 10 cents in calendar year 2025 to $3 per capita, while the per capita multiplier for private activity bond allocation will jump $5 to $130 per capita, according to Revenue Procedure 2024-40. Both the 9% LIHTC multiplier and the private activity bond multiplier figures are new high records, as are the small state minimums. Of course, states with certain population which would not hit these minimums get the minimum level. So the minimum LIHTC allocation is a little over $3.4 million for 9% credits and a little over $388 million for the private activity bonds. Similarly, other related news, the LIHTC rehab per unit minimum will be $8,500. So again, probably all the rehab deals you're doing, probably you're at $40,000, $60,000, $80,000 per rehab. But again, there is still a minimum to qualify for the credit. And again, that will be $8,500. Two last things before Garrick and I jump into our year in review is really a thank you. A thank you for our listeners for tuning in, for telling us how and when you listen, for suggesting topics. We greatly enjoy our discussions and exploring what's new in legislation, financing, construction, and other topics. And it's been great and very fun to meet some of our listeners at housing conferences around the country and various calls. And again, sincerely want to thank our guests. We wouldn't be here without our guests as well for both what they do every day in the housing field, as well as for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us. So again, a sincere thank you. Garrick and I have a wonderful time doing this, and we learn a lot ourselves. Now, Garrick and I will jump into our year in review. Garrick, starting with you, what topics, what episodes are top of mind from the past year?
Yeah. Thanks, Don. Thanks for the intro. And again, thanks for thanking our listeners. We definitely appreciate our listeners. As far as topics, if I look back at this year's podcast, I was kind of drawn to the podcast where we explored multifamily housing bond financing with Wade Norris. I'm constantly working with taxes and bond structures for 4% transactions. So having Wade discuss not only the innovative structures that are out there designed to maximize loan proceeds, minimize borrowing costs, but the way he illustrated why these products are being introduced. I love the science and how he laid out the inverted yield curve discussions and went over how this contributed to, these short-term cashback bond structures with the tax-exempt private placement executions, which at the time was especially relevant because I was seeing a lot of these transactions come across my desk. It was great kind of having that podcast and going over them. It seems like every fluctuating interest rate environment creates these interesting opportunities for bond financing. And so I thought that was a great podcast. As far as other ones, I also enjoyed the podcast with Erica Mackey. She was discussing the potential for the solar for all. Our clients are very focused on integrating the IRA energy incentives into their projects. And this podcast I felt was informative how that $7 billion program could help reach underserved communities. She did a great job, I thought, of including the policy discussions in there and what kind of regulatory obstacles are apparent. We all know solar's out there. We've seen it on projects, but there's so many details that need to be thought of in terms of interconnection, energy jurisdiction issues, and other things. And I thought she laid out some key issues to think about for our listeners. So, those are two of my kind of top ones that I thought were great.
Perfect. And I'll jump in as well. And my favorite, not just because it was our most recent release, so in recent memory, but was our most recent release talking about how the 2024 election results may affect the multifamily housing industry is definitely at the top of my list, Garrick. It's something we always get a lot of questions on, especially with new administration. Will corporate tax rates be affected? What type of legislation is out there that maybe could pass? Again, of course, David Gasson, our guest representing the Housing Advisory Group, is always such a wealth of knowledge and very specific individual senators and representatives and how all that came to play. And again, how there'll be reconciliation this year through the tax reform, which will be historic in nature. And I did not know this, Garrick, but I was very excited to know that David thought there's a strong path through this reconciliation process to get at least parts of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act through. And Garrick, I look back, we've been talking about the AHCIA for probably the last 3+ years. And is there a path? And for our listeners, again, you've definitely heard the phrase, but what it would do is could bring back 12.5% more 9% credits, annually. It would also then, right, so many states, back to Garrick's point on tax and bonds, so many states run out of tax exempt bond volume cap. This is the bill that would reduce the 50% test to maybe 30%, wherever it may land. And also, it would potentially give discretionary basis boost, the 30% basis boost to state HFAs. Right now, states have it for the 9%, but not tax and bond transactions. And this could possibly give states that discretionary boost. And we know how tight 4% deals can be and hard to do in many areas without that boost. One final thing, very interesting enough, is that we know many state programs or state LIHTC programs want lower income units, 30% AMIs and so forth. And again, possibly this would have language around giving basis boost pro rata. In some language, I've seen as much as 50% basis boost. I don't know if that would be final or not, to projects that have 30% AMI units. So tax reform is definitely something we're going to be following later in 2025. The AHCIA, along with just everything else tax. As we know, bonus depreciation has been going down. And when does it go away, Garrick? Right now, it goes away.
It's supposed to burn off by the end of 2026.
2026. So we'll be watching that. Garrick, you touched on Solar for All. Yes, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund in general. I think we had a couple episodes this past year. You touched specifically on Solar for All. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is significant. We actually closed our first deal this past year in 2024 using the Green Retrofit and Resiliency Program, GRP. And so that was in 2023. But to Garrick's point, this is going to be big. Some of these dollars, CCIA, we're actually going to have a podcast around the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. I think every project, if you're not already, should see what's out there around the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And a lot of it starts with being 100% electric for new construction. Again, that's not always possible, of course, for renovations, but a lot more to come on that. Garrick, switching back to you. So that was 2024. A lot of good episodes, a lot of fun discussions. 2025, right? A lot of questions about 2025. But Garrick, what are you looking forward to transpiring? What are some things you're going to be keeping your attention focused on?
Well, I know, pre-podcast discussions, there's probably a little overlap with you and I. And And I just keep thinking back to like Brent Mayer, who was on here doing one of our podcasts, and he said, stay alive till 2025. So, we're here, right? So, looking ahead, I think you mentioned it earlier, right? So I'm looking forward to seeing the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator program, the CCIA, roll out. I know the $6 billion that was dished out to the 5 grant recipients to facilitate these into the community lenders that are working in low income and disadvantaged communities. The program is slated to provide up to like $10 million per community lender. So I expect to see a lot of funds being deployed for things like net zero buildings and other energy multifamily type projects, where it's needed most. So looking forward to seeing how that's going to roll out over this next year. And based on, like I said, other discussions like you, I'm looking forward to what's coming out of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, depending on if all this stuff ever gets pushed forward. I know you had some details you wanted to share on that too. So I'll just say this, given the shortage of affordable housing across every region of the United States, I'm just hopeful that we can get some legislation passed that allows for some ability to make a dent in this ever growing affordable housing crisis that we're experiencing. I know Congress has a myriad of things to consider, especially with energy as well, but affordable housing is just a must, period, as far as I'm concerned. Lastly, I am looking forward to seeing how states respond to this affordable housing crisis. We already seen interesting things come out of states to help fill in financing gaps in the form of credits or other subsidies. Take Colorado, for instance. I'm not biased here because I currently reside here, but they have implemented a middle income tax credit to help more of the missing middle projects get off the ground. In addition, they now allow their state affordable housing credit to be accelerated with 70% being allowed in year one. So it's these kinds of little steps that I think states can do to help fill in, some of these financing gaps and get more deals pushed through to completion. So I hope we'll see more of this from other states in 2025.
And then, yeah, I'll just chime in too, Garrick. Yeah, definitely, right. AHCIA, as you noted, and Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, but again, very high on my list. But I can talk about, and you and I talk, Garrick, a lot about faith-based housing. And this is really a trend, and it's been out there for a while. But I think exacerbated by COVID, we actually had a podcast in, I believe, 2023 on this. A meeting mission, there are many faith-based groups that may have older physical buildings that have existed for quite some time. They might have congregations or groups of gatherers that, are not as active as they have been and really can't keep up on maintenance and budget and so forth. For these reasons and others, we're seeing many faith-based groups discerning what to do with their real estate. And with the strong need of affordable housing in many communities, along with maybe things like childcare, job training centers, we see many faith-based groups looking at how they can utilize real estate to help them sustain as an organization, but yet obviously with their mission and so forth, creating positive impact in their communities. In the last 3 weeks, I've had discussions with national faith-based groups, local kind of one-off faith-based groups, just thinking about this, generating revenue and creating housing and impact. So very keen on watching this. Public housing is definitely a topic we've talked a lot about, and myself and my colleague Kayla Nuss are part of a working group called the 10-Year Roadmap for public housing. Of course, RAD Rental Assistance Demonstration, came out over about 10 years ago, 2012-ish, 2013. So we've seen 10 years of RAD, and HUD's done a great job of kind of updating and continuing to make the program work maybe better. But it's not hitting all the units, and there's a lot of work to be done. So really excited to see about what this 10-year roadmap, where it can take us as an industry across public housing. And then, Garrick, finally, really last thing we're starting to see, and we've talked about it again with Wade Norris and probably others on the call, nonprofits, public housing authorities going out there and getting investment grade ratings from S&P or Moody's or Fitch or whatever they work with. And we're actually closing a couple transactions right now with the structure. And I think even if rates come down, I think this is a tool that's becoming more accepted and understood in the market, and looking forward to working more on those with you.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, because I mean, a lot of times you have rehabilitations that, given the volume cap, they're sort of pressured there. So with those programs and being rated and hopefully getting favorable rates, you might get the similar amount of rehab that you would if you were to execute a 4% bond transaction for those PHAs. So yeah, that's definitely something to look for in 2025 as well. Thanks for bringing that up.
That's it for this episode of the BuzzHouse. Garrick and I really enjoyed walking through a review of 2024 and looking ahead to 2025. Once again, I'm Don Bernards.
And I'm Garrick Gibson.
Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. For additional resources around multifamily housing, check out bakertilly.com. If you have a suggestion for the show, email us at build@bakertilly.com. That's BUILD @bakertilly.com. See you next time on BuzzHouse.